Let me take a look at it. There is something we can look at. New chart. 0320. Take a look at the daily. And go. Okay. I'm expecting up moves today. So what's going on with this chart? This is a good place to teach something. Last night in one of my YouTube videos, I posted that class last night on the solar cycles in relation to recessions, and kind of had mixed reviews in the comments. People, I am sharing my screen, yes. Can you guys see my screen okay? Tom, Earl, Mike. Earl says he sees it okay. Okay. Excellent. Hey, Mike, good morning. So one of the things that WD Gann was pretty adamant about in 1909. There's a great article. Here it is. Page 54 of the Ticker and Investment Digest is pretty remarkable. And here we go. I want to just key in on this, and I think it's going to help you guys a lot, whether you're a Force customer or a Warp customer or just sort of a novice aficionado of natural law. We've got this quote. Let me zoom it back out a little bit. I soon began to notice the periodical recurrence of the rise and the periodical recurrence of the fall in stocks and commodities. This led me to conclude that natural law was the basis of market movements. I decided to devote 10 years of my life to the study of natural law as applicable to the markets, and devote my best energies toward making speculation a profitable profession. And then he talks about the law of vibration, enabling him to put that all together. But what's really interesting is this idea of natural law. It emerges several times in the quote. And when we're discussing it, it's very easy to forget that the basis of natural law is nature. And so on this chart that we're displaying right here, there's some really interesting phenomenon occurring, and I wanted to clue you in on it because I think it has tremendous value. We'll call today the 1-2 punch. The 1-2 punch. And I'm going to have Q1 and Q2 up here. Everywhere you see a little green dot is a first quarter lunar phase. First quarter lunar phase. Everywhere you see a large green dot is a second quarter lunar phase or a full moon, right? So again, we tie everything back to natural law. And he says that natural law is responsible to the periodical recurrence, the repetition. Periodical. Okay, it's hard. It's hard to decipher Gann. He uses a language that periodic, recurring intervals, recurring at intervals of time, occurring or appearing at regular intervals. Astronomy, characterized by a series of successive circuits or revolutions as the motion of a planet, of relating to a period. Okay, and so one of the things that I'd like you to key in on is that there is a periodic recurrence of these phases. So, Mike, as I work my way through, can you notice, one, how the distance between Q1 to next Q1 is periodic? The gap is nearly universally the same. Now, there's a margin of error here because sometimes it occurs on a weekend and we lose a day or two. If it's on a Saturday or a Friday night, for example, it won't appear till a Monday on this chart. But does everyone see the periodic nature of a Q1? The periodic nature of a Q2 or a full moon? It's like clockwork. So if you think of a sporting event like a football game, there are 4 quarters in a football game, and they have the same amount of time. And so there are 4 quarters in a lunar sequence, and they have the same amount of time. But where Gann fails to, where WD Gann fails to, I think, expand in a way that makes sense to people, is in regards to what's occurring at these events. Okay, so we discussed yesterday the effect of electromagnetic deltas on sort of human beings, right? And we understood that there's a profound connection between the sun, the occupants on Earth, and the moon. Well, when the moon is full, there is a 100% reflection of that radiation on our planet. When that radiation reaches us, and there are different forms of the radiation or different portions of the spectrum. We have X-ray, we have gamma ray. When those things arrive at Earth's ionosphere, the shell that surrounds us, as it were, the more of it that occurs as the density of that radiation increases, it is on par with when you were at a birthday party and you rubbed your hair on a balloon. It creates an electromagnetic field. When that radiation streaks across the ionosphere, it excites the ionosphere. It charges it. It puts a charge density into the Earth's field and changes the magnetic and electric field. What we know especially from very recent discoveries, there is a part of your mind that can be triggered, that is excited by, responds sensory. You have a sixth sense. It's becoming more and more established that detects these changes in the magnetic field. Very, very small, minute deltas in the magnetic field. And so what happens is when the moon is only half full, forgive me, my drawing skills today, only half of that light is being transferred to this candy-coated shell. And when the moon is in its fullness, the entirety of that radiation is being reflected onto the ionosphere, exciting a heavier density of electric field. And we have a correlated response on the chart. So what's interesting is that as that first quarter is arrived at, you'll notice that there's a highly punctuated impulse wave that occurs, usually within one day, if not the exact day of Q1. And it's pronounced, meaning the market usually moves immediately up and away out of that area. And so what I'm going to just do here is sort of draw this line of where it goes in relation to the next Q1 event. So we kind of push up and level out. It's a rocket launch of sorts. A first stage booster might be the best way to describe it. Does everybody understand that so far? Okay, so when we come into the Q2, that's the full moon. And everything from Q2 into Q3, which is when the light starts to decrease, when the energy starts to recede, the tide starts going out, that second wave terminates. And so what we're seeing here is the second wave of Q2 coming into the next phase. Now, what's fascinating is that you can go online. I have indicators that do this and other things inside of them. But if you type lunar phase 2020, the dates come up. And you can see when these first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter phases are occurring. So the third quarter, that's January 17th. Okay, today's the 9th. So there's 6 more calendar days until the next little red dot. So one of the things that we can do is we can physically measure the exertion of the market from the low of Q1 to the high of the Q2. Okay, so I'm going to just draw a triangle here that measures how far was the market historically able to be pushed with institutional leverage. Because make no mistake, the banks are aware of this. And so what I'm doing here is I'm just keeping track of how far the market is pushed each time. And so what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to harvest that information and I'm going to apply it to our current situation. And what we'll see is that there's usually a median of exertion. So if I pull this down to the present, we had a level here, we have a level here. We're already past this level and then this level. So Earl, the next exertion level on the ES is at 9067. I'm sorry, the NQ, 9067 in the next 6 calendar days before the 17th. And then there's another one right here in the middle, 9097. So somewhere between 67 and 97 is a sort of zone of confluence between at least 2 of the exertion levels. But we knew coming into the Q1 that the minimum that we were expecting this thing to go was right here. The minimum we were expecting it to go based on the average response to that excitation is the first level here, which was 89.66. Okay? So when you're using natural law, number one, subdivide the information into phases on your chart. Number two, keep track of how far the market moves at each one of the phases. In this case, I call that an exertion analysis. You can use arrow lines, you can use drawing tools, I use triangles. And then number three, go back on the present current signal and align all of those, harvest all of those exertions on top of the existing signal to get an idea of how far it's expected to go in terms of a projection. You can keep track of favorable excursion and adverse excursion, how far it went against the original signal and how far it went for the original signal. And then you can apply either the favorable or the adverse and the favorable on top to get a feeling for how far will it pull back and how far should it go. Okay, so in this case on the NQ, we're coming into the next phase 5 days, 8 hours from now. And when we get there, we're expecting the next signal, which is the phase 3. And this is, again, another periodic signal. I'm just going to draw it down from the top to give you some idea of what usually happens. And Mike, you'll see that it's either a pullback or it's a stall. The last one, they blew right through it. It only had 2 days of stall before it started to continue to rise. So that's sort of where we're headed next. But in terms of a trend signal, median is somewhere in the 66 to 97, 9100 level. 9200 would sort of be the end of the extreme, the Hail Mary pass. Does that make sense, everybody? It's one way to keep track of, if you're in a trend, when energy that is being delivered astronomically, so to speak, is pouring into the sink, pouring into the sink. So those are the phases, the moments in time using natural law theory where the market is least likely to consolidate, is least likely to pull back against you. Now I think on here, I have the ability in the software to advance the signal one day or retard the signal one day. Yeah, and here I actually have a 3-day advance warning for the signals. So I think there's a 3-day shift. So why I would do that is pretty simple. Banks will actually run stops right before the event. Institutions will actually run stops right before the occurrence, where people are kind of sensitive to that. And so if you have the daily cycle marker software, which is just a lunar phase tool, I actually have a 3-day, what's the word? Shift on the signals. So the signal appears 3 days before the actual signal to let me know, hey, they're getting ready to pound this thing. And then the smart money is in, and then the dumb money, the little money, panics, reverses their position, and really rockets it in the other direction for the big boys for a while, usually on lower volume. So this chart here, if you go back and you look at it in the dates where I have the signals, they're based on a 3-day shift. That's probably the last thing I want you to remember today. All right, good class. Anyone have any questions about that before I move on? No? Okay, cool. So that's kind of our bias today. I do have a Skype call that's coming in from overseas, so there'll be a point where you don't hear me for a little while. I am going to continue to show the setups on the screen, however, and I'll make sure that I'm indicating those with my cursor when the call comes in.